Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us in this breakout session and this workshop this afternoon. Today, we're going to be walking you through Universal Code Search, and more specifically, Sourcegraph, the application that gives you the ability to search across your code no matter where it lives. And we'll show you how you can use that as you work and contribute on the Open3D Engine project to help optimize your workflows as a developer and improve your overall developer experience as you contribute to this awesome project. So real quick, by way of introduction, my name is Jonah Dueck. I am on our customer engineering team here at Sourcegraph. So essentially my role is to work with developers like yourselves, whether open source or at companies like Netflix, Twitter, and Lyft, and really help them understand what Sourcegraph is, how they can use it and apply it to their use cases and workflows and get the most value out of the tool. So today we're going to explain to you kind of what Sourcegraph is and the problem of big code that we're solving. And then we're going to do a live demo of the application itself and walk you through some example use cases and workflows and show you how you can use it as you contribute to the Open3D Engine project. So quick overview of our agenda today. So first question we need to answer is, what is Sourcegraph? So some of you may have heard of it, maybe some of you have even used it, but for those of you who haven't, essentially Sourcegraph, this slide kind of gives you the detailed breakdown of what Sourcegraph is. At its core, we're a universal code search tool. So we sit on top of your code, no matter where it lives, and give you a browser-based interface to search across your code. So you can do things like what's laid out here, like code discovery. So like I said, searching across your code, finding examples of usage and code reuse, debugging and incident response. Code intelligence, so giving you that ability to understand the code you're looking at with go to definition and find references, as well as change management throughout your code base. So large scale upgrades, refactors, deprecations through our batch changes feature. Monitor for security vulnerabilities with our code monitor tool, and get insights of your code base and what's occurring throughout it with code insights. You can see we work with all of your major languages and file formats, so pretty much everything out there across all major code hosts. So no matter where your code lives, in any major dev environment with a lot of popular dev tools. And so really this problem that Sourcegraph is solving is kind of this idea of big code. And what is big code? Essentially the way we think of it is it's kind of this cycle that you can see here, where you have more developers who are shipping more software and writing more code. As more code gets created and code bases get larger, they become more complex. And as the complexity of code bases increase, more devs are needed to be hired to maintain and contribute to those code bases. So it's kind of this vicious cycle that repeats over and over and gets exponentially more difficult to solve without a tool like Sourcegraph. And we kind of use this analogy of an iceberg, right? So you can see the complexity that we're talking about is exponential, where the tip of the iceberg is kind of the end user experience of the product or project you're working on. But underlying, under the surface, you can see the majority of the iceberg is all these complex things like open source libraries and legacy code across multiple code hosts and multiple repositories, et cetera, et cetera. And so Sourcegraph was really created to help you solve this problem. It was founded in 2013 by our co-founders Quinn and Bayong, who in prior experience as developers at companies like JP Morgan and Palantir and Google, discovered that there was no good tooling out there that really existed to help them as they contributed to those code bases and developed software. They were hindered by the complexity of those code bases and being able to ramp up and understand them quickly. So they created Sourcegraph to help solve that. And we're going to show you how Sourcegraph does that. But the pain points that happen that you experience, and I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to some of these on this slide, if you don't solve this big code problem, you see these problems pop up across things like poor developer experience. So that trickles down to poor onboarding and taking longer to ramp up and understand the code you're working on. The code review process tends to be slower and take a little bit longer. There's unclear ownership of who owns which aspects of the code base. It slows down developer velocity, right? So if you're taking longer to onboard, you're taking longer before you can start contributing to something like this project and make a meaningful impact. Increases things like tech debt as well. And it also opens up the door to potential security vulnerabilities if you don't have that insight into what's occurring in your code base. So Sourcegraph solves this problem through kind of three pillars of the product. The core aspect is kind of that underlying search functionality, that universal code search, which we're going to show you here in a second. And so that gives you the ability, like I said, to search across all your repositories, all your code hosts, all of your languages, no matter where they're hosted, you can search across all of them universally, directly in your browser. The second aspect is giving you the ability to understand the code you're looking at. So giving you that context and that information that you wouldn't otherwise have. So with things like go to definition, find reference, understanding ownership, et cetera. And last but not least, we have an automation portion as well. So this is with things in the product like batch changes, which we'll touch on, which gives you that ability to do large-scale changes and refactors, upgrades and migrations, deprecations, et cetera. We'll touch on that here in the demo. And so Sourcegraph has kind of become the industry standard for managing this big code problem. So if any of you have worked at companies that you see on this list, this is just a small subset of the organizations we work with, but across the board, they're starting to adopt Sourcegraph and integrate it into their developer tooling and workflows to help them solve these problems. And we're seeing use cases for the tool across things like increasing developer satisfaction and retention, increasing developer productivity and effectiveness, which is kind of going to be our focus in the demo here today, and a couple other use cases as well. So, enough of the boring talking and slide decks. Let's actually dive into the demo itself and show you what this looks like, how it works, and how you can use it as you build and contribute to the Open 3D Engine project. So let's jump into the application. So just to kind of give you the lay of the land and what we're looking at here. Actually, let me go full screen so this is a little bit easier to see. So this is sourcegraph.com. So there's just to kind of give you an overview, there's a few different ways to access and deploy Sourcegraph. We have sourcegraph.com, which is what you're seeing here, which is our free, public, open source, easy to use application. You can just head there, create an account, and search across a couple million open source repositories that we've indexed and cloned. You can also deploy on-prem, whether that's in GCP or AWS, whatever your cloud provider of choice might be. You can do that on Docker Compose or Kubernetes. And we also offer a local Docker install as well. You can just run a quick Docker run command and spin up Sourcegraph locally on your machine and connect your code to it and start searching across it. For this demo today, we're going to be using sourcegraph.com because, like I said, it has several million open source repositories indexed on it. And of course, we wouldn't be here at Open 3D Engine Con if we didn't have all of the O3DE repos indexed and ready to search across. So you can see in this demo, we're going to be searching across the O3DE repos. And I have this selected using our search context. And we'll touch on search context later on in the demo. But high level, what they allow you to do is search across a specified set of repos. And so we have a context created just for O3DE. And this contains, I think, all 20-something Open3D repositories for the project. So that's what we'll be searching across. And kind of the goal of this demo is to show you how you can use Sourcegraph to do things like increase the reuse of code. So deduplifying what's contained in the code base. Using Sourcegraph to help you find things that might already exist that you could then take and reuse in your own project instead of having to take those things and create them from scratch. We'll show you how this can help you get a better understanding and map awareness and lay of the land of the code base if you're newer to the project and wanting to starting to contribute. So let's start there, actually. Let's say that I'm newer to this project. I'm just now starting to get familiar with the O3DE code base, and I want to start working on maybe a new component to include in our gem library for the engine. And I want to kind of understand what components currently are out there, where they exist, maybe how they've been written, who wrote them, how they're implemented, just start getting some understanding so that I could then take that information and start working on components of my own. So I'm going to approach Sourcegraph in kind of the same way that I would go to Google if I want to find something on the internet. I can just start with a pretty high-level query, and we'll narrow down as we go. So let's just start, like I said, pretty high level. We're going to just run our initial search looking for components. So if we run this search, you notice very fast performance search right out of the box. So we're getting over 500 results in a fraction of a second from all 23 repos contained in this project. We get a nice preview of all of the matches to our query as well. So you can see each match is highlighted. We get some nice context lines and previews for each file. So initially, as I'm seeing these results, I'm seeing a lot of markdown and text files. I know since I want to work on the component library, that's written in C++. So I probably only want to see results in files written in C++. So Sourcegraph actually intelligently recommends what we call dynamic filters. And you'll see this on the left-hand side here. And so I'm going to use the language filter that's been suggested to filter down by C++. So if I click to enable that, you'll notice it adds it into the search box here. The syntax is just lang colon and then the language name. And now I'm getting results just in C++, so that's great. I can narrow it down even further though. So let's say that I'm working on a component that I know is going to be in kind of like the multiplayer side of things within the engine. And so I only want to see results that are contained within the multiplayer repo itself. So again, that's been suggested here as well. I can see the multiplayer repo. If I click to apply that, you notice it autofills using our repo filter syntax. It just autofills the directory of that particular repo. So now I'm narrowing it down even further to find what I'm looking for. One other quick adjustment I'll make is Sourcegraph allows you to search across not only the main or master branch of a repo, but also any branches, revisions, or tags. And you'll notice those suggested here as well. Since I know the development branch is probably the one I want to see because that's what's actively being contributed, I'll click to apply that. You'll notice that we get this little error message. That's because I already had a revision specified in the repo, the directory itself. So I'll just remove that and run the query again. And now I'm only seeing files on this particular branch that match the string component written in C++ contained in this repo. So now I can start looking through here. Again, like what we saw earlier, I can see all the matches to my string that I'm searching for highlighted, as well as the context around them. So I can scroll through here and see if there's anything that stands out as something maybe I want to dive into a bit further and get some deeper understanding and context around. So let's just open up one of these files. Let's take this, actually, let's find out, let's see if we can see all of the component files contained in this particular repo. Then we'll go through those and see if there's one we want to dive into further. So let's open up this repo here. If we click on the repo name, it opens up the repo overview. So now I can see all the files in this repo, both here as well as in the left side panel. I can get the drop-down file navigation. Going back over here, I can also see the most recent changes and commits against this particular repo. So let's open up the components folder, which I think is under gem, and then we go to code, source, and components. So now I'm in the components folder. I can see all the components contained in this repo, and I can start going through these and seeing if there's one I want to dive into a bit further, get some further understanding and context around. Let's just open up this network player movement component file. We'll open up the header file here. And you see, I clicked to open it. It's opening it up, again, directly in my browser. I haven't needed to download and clone these repos locally to access this. It's all taking place in my browser. And you'll notice it's a very similar experience as I'm going through this file to that of an IDE. So same file navigation experience. I get the full file here. I can also navigate through all the other files contained in this repository as well. So going through this file, now I can start really looking through this code, getting that context and understanding around how it's written. And this is where that code intelligence functionality, so that ability to understand the code you're looking at, comes in. So in Sourcegraph, we call this code intelligence. So it's what you're familiar with in your editor, things like go to definition and find reference. We provide that directly in your browser via hover tooltips. So for example, if I hover over this component controller function, for example, you'll see I'm presented with a box. I can click find references, which will run a reference search for that symbol and show me everywhere that it appears in this repo across all of these various files. So again, super helpful if I'm newer to the project, getting an understanding of how I could create a component. This is really helpful getting that context of how a component's created, where it's implemented, and how it's written. And I can see everywhere where it's referenced. There's also a definition tab. I can click on that. That'll show me the root file where this particular class or component was created. I could go to the definition there. And there's also a history tab. So if I click on this is going to show me the Git commit history for this particular file. So I can see the latest commit and the author of that commit as well. Along those same lines as commit history, we also have a Git blame integration. So you'll notice the little Git blame icon in the toolbar here. If I click once, that'll enable it on a per line basis for each file. So I can click across each file and see the latest commit for that particular line. I can also click twice on the extension, which will enable it across all lines within the file and show me every commit to each line. So for example, if I wanted to get more information on who wrote this component controller and what was contained in that commit, I can click on Gene's commit here, open this up, Again, directly in Sourcegraph, this is just pulling it in from GitHub, and I'm able to see the diff. I have a couple options if I want to view it in unified view or split view and compare them to each other. And I can go through the entire commit, view all the diffs, the changelog, everything associated with it. And I touched on earlier in the slide deck that we have a lot of deep integrations with some popular dev tools and code hosts. And we have a really cool integration with GitHub in particular. So I'm sure a lot of you do a lot of your work in GitHub as you're contributing to this project. So if you're starting to implement Sourcegraph into that workflow, it's really easy to switch between Sourcegraph and GitHub and vice versa. So you'll notice the little GitHub icon up here in the top right corner. This allows you to open up any file, commit, diff, whatever it may be that you're viewing in Sourcegraph, and it allows you to open it up directly on GitHub itself. So say I wanted to view this commit on GitHub. I can click to open, and it's going to open up this commit directly on GitHub like I would be viewing it normally. What's really cool about our integration is that via our browser extension, which you can see I have installed here, and it's just pointed to the URL of my Sourcegraph instance, this browser extension is available for Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. This powers that same code intelligence functionality I showed you earlier directly on GitHub. So say if you're doing something like a code review, for example, and you're reviewing a PR, looking at a commit, seeing what's being changed, and you want to get some understanding around the functions that you're looking at in GitHub itself. So you can actually just click on each symbol. Let's see if it works for me. There we go. So if I hover over a symbol, again, I get that same hover tooltip. I can click Find References, which will open up a new Sourcegraph tab and run a reference search for that particular symbol. And again, you can see I can navigate through all the files where it's contained. So really easy to switch back and forth from GitHub and Sourcegraph and vice versa. So really helpful if you're, like I said, doing something like a code review and wanting to use that code intelligence functionality to help you get context of the code you're looking at. Okay, let's close out a couple of these tabs here. Along the same lines as integrations, so we talked about the Git blame integration, the Git history, as well as the GitHub integration. We also have some really cool editor integrations as well. So if I go to our extensions library up here in the top, and you'll notice we have a variety of extensions and integrations available. So with things like popular dev tools like CodeCov, Datadog, Sentry, SonarQube, et cetera, you can integrate those and get data from those tools directly within the files you're looking at. We also have some editor integrations as well. So you'll notice we have some native integrations already built for some popular editors like Atom, IntelliJ, Sublime, VS Code. We also have a generic open and editor extension. So this allows you to take any editor of choice, connect it to Sourcegraph, and basically all you're doing here is you're just pointing the extension to the base path of your locally cloned repos, which then allows Sourcegraph to, with a click of the button, take that file you're looking at in your browser and open it up locally in your editor of choice. So if we went back to that file we were just in a moment ago, you'll notice the little open and editor extension. If I click on this, it's going to open up a prompt asking me if I want to open this up, in this case, in VS Code. If I click yes, it'll just open it up in VS Code, and I can start working on it. I don't have this file cloned locally, so I can't show you that, unfortunately, but that's the basic functionality. So again, really easy to just click of a button, find what you're looking for, using Sourcegraph like we showed you here, and then open that up and start working on it quickly in your editor. Okay, so a couple other kind of like high-level features and functionality I'd like to walk y'all through when it comes to the Sourcegraph application. The first one is batch changes. So I touched on this when we talked about the automation portion of Sourcegraph. So again, those three pillars of search and understand and automate. Batch changes is kind of the core component of our automation pillar. And essentially what batch changes allows you to do is execute large-scale changes across disparate code hosts and across all of your files and manage them from a central place. So you can essentially create one change and execute that across potentially thousands of files and create thousands of PRs all at once. And it allows you to essentially run any type of arbitrary code that you can execute in a Docker container on your code, and then creates those PRs and lets you manage them and track them through to close. So one caveat with batch changes that I'll call out, it's not available on sourcegraph.com, but it is available if you have this deployed locally. So if you're spinning up a local Docker instance and want to try this out, or if you have an enterprise version of Sourcegraph, you can use it there. Speaking of automation, another aspect that we have within Sourcegraph is code monitors. So this allows you to create a search query, and for any match to that query contained in a diff or a commit message, it'll trigger a notification and let you know about it. So I've created one. This is more of like a security use case where I want to find any Docker images in my code base that are using a latest tag instead of an explicit image digest that I've pinned to them. If there are any Dockerfile images using that latest tag introduced in a commit, that'll trigger this query, and then that'll send me an email notification letting me know, hey, this potential vulnerability has just been introduced in a commit. You might want to take a look at it. So current functionality for notifications is via email. Work in progress right now that our team is building out is webhook support. So in the near future, you'll be able to integrate notifications wherever you could integrate a webhook. And last but certainly not least, when it comes to the automation portion of Sourcegraph is a relatively new feature that we're pretty excited about called Code Insights. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. So Code Insights, as you can see here, it's in that beta phase. We're just about to roll it out to GA, but kind of wanted to give you all a sneak peek of what to expect. Essentially, you can think of Insights as allowing you, again, powered by Sourcegraph's query syntax, you can take anything that you can query within Sourcegraph and create a visualization and track those metrics in charts and dashboards. So we've created some examples here for what that could look like. So we're doing things like tracking various migrations, so GraphQL types or React function components, testing, database usage, even lang usage. We can track that on a per repo basis and see the makeup of the various languages within our code base. Each of these is its own data point as well. So if I click on these, you can see the query and the syntax powering that particular insight. It's just running a regex search looking for those function components within a various timestamp. And I'm able to see all the diffs that contain matches to that particular query. So keep an eye out for Insights. We're expecting to launch Insights to sourcegraph.com when it rolls out to GA in the early part of next year. It is available for you to beta test and try out if you have a local install as well. So if that's something you're interested in, spin up Sourcegraph locally on Docker, and you'll be able to access it there. Cool. So a couple other things, we kind of, in our initial search query, we ran that as like kind of a pretty basic, straightforward literal search, and then we used some filtering and various syntax options to help us find what we were looking for. But Sourcegraph offers more to search than just literal. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with literal search when it comes to things like GitHub or your IDE, right? But Sourcegraph builds on top of that by offering a couple more advanced search modes. So the first one is regular expression search, which we just saw in that Insights demo. So let's say, going back to that use case where we wanted to find all these components, understand how they were written, and how we could implement our own and start contributing to the project. I can use regular expression search in a variety of ways to help me find more advanced things or functions or components within the code base. So thinking back to that component we opened up, it was something around network multiplayer, right? I don't remember the full name of the function or the component, but what I can do is I can use regular expression search. So I can just type out, let's just say we want to find anything that's multiplayer and contains network. I can use regular expression search, and if I run this, it's going to return results using fuzzy string matching. So instead of that literal search, I'm now able to use fuzzy string matching where all the results I'm returning here are either partial or related matches to my initial query. So this is really handy if I don't know the exact name, say, of a function or a component. I can just search for the keywords that I know and use that fuzzy string matching to help me find what I'm looking for. And again, I could utilize our various filter options like language filter and repository filters to narrow it down even further. Regular expression search, of course, also supports regex syntax. We use Google's open source RE2 syntax, so if you're familiar with that, that allows you to do things like use and/or operators in your queries, construct more complex queries, and escape white spaces, account for new lines, things like that. But most importantly, it also allows you to utilize that fuzzy string matching, which you can see here is returning results related to that initial multiplayer network query that may not necessarily be an exact match. Last but certainly not least, we have an even more advanced search mode on top of regex that we call structural search. And structural search allows you to, believe it or not, search for the structure of code. So for example, if I'm looking for some implementation of a function, let's just use like a very straightforward if statement, right? So I have my if statement, and then the arguments for this if statement would be contained within parentheses. But I don't know what those exact arguments are. I just want to find any implementation of an if statement in my code base. So I can use structural search to help with that. So the only difference I'm going to do here, instead of typing out like the exact arguments that would be contained in these parentheses, I can use ellipses. If I put 3 of them in there, that's going to create what we call a structural hole. And what Sourcegraph is going to do is it's going to match any if statement to this structural hole and return everything across my code base that matches this particular structure and all the arguments contained within it. So the structural search icon is these brackets here on the right. So if I click to run this, you notice now it's returning all of these if statements and all of the arguments contained within those parentheses across all the files within this code base. So now I'm able to see everywhere that an if statement has been written. So that pretty much wraps up kind of the high-level overview that I wanted to walk y'all through when it comes to using Sourcegraph, how you can use it to get started in terms of finding and reusing code and getting familiar with the O3DE code base and navigating throughout it. Like I said, if you go to sourcegraph.com, you'll notice that we have the search context already created for O3DE. You notice it right here on the bottom right. You can open it up, search across all of O3DE's code, as well as pretty much any open source project you may want to search across from GitHub or GitLab as well. So feel free to head to sourcegraph.com, free to use, create an account. You can get started searching across all this code directly in your browser. You don't even need to clone it locally. So, like I said, that pretty much wraps up the overview I wanted to walk y'all through. I know we have a bit of time left, so happy to use the remainder of it to answer any questions any of you might have here live in person. And of course, I'll dive into the Q&A on the virtual platform as well and answer any questions there. Thanks all so much for your time.